Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Middle East Teaching and Learning Conference. My name is Catherine O'Farrell. I am a group head for 11 schools here in the UAE. I have been teaching and practicing as a psychologist and a teacher for almost 15 years across Ireland, the UK, Australia, and for the last almost 10 years here in the UAE. If you would like to ask me any questions throughout the talk, please feel free to do so and I can answer them in the chat section of the app. So today I'm going to talk about online learning and students of determination. So in March, we had a sudden shift. The whole world, everybody experienced a sudden shift to online education and provision. And here in the UAE, we had more than 2.5 million students who made that shift from in-class general school provision that we've had for the last 200 years to a whole new mode of delivery and learning platforms. And of these students in the primary and secondary sector, approximately 6% of these experience some form of individual learning or emotional needs. And historically, some students of determination traditionally have found structured schooling to be a really poor fit. Many of our students struggle mainstream. They experience inequity of access, and high needs students often suffer from social pressures and behavioural challenges and sensory overload. And I think as educators, we've probably all seen those scenes where certain kids will really struggle in a classroom and they'll end up having meltdowns regularly. And because some students really struggled, the shift to online learning for that cohort of kids, has actually been a really positive shift and has had really a really good impact on their learning progress and their experience overall. So our observations over the past months, we've seen many students thriving in the online setting. And in my experience across our schools, we have 9 schools and we tracked lessons daily from the first week of provision as everyone tried to find their way forward, right through to the very last week of provision. And we delivered support for our students of determination through our usual school teams in the form of push-in sessions, pull-out sessions, one-to-one small group, and we really tailored to those kids' needs. Now, what we found worked well was a really structured approach with constant monitoring and review. In March, we faced a complete shift in our educational practices, and handling our students with extremely high needs was a real priority for each of our schools. So our team leaders from across all 9 schools, we came together and we agreed on a plan of action very early on. And part of that agreement was that we would foster a systems thinking approach where we would generate or build on an existing community of practice, share our ideas, share our experiences, and freely engage in trial and error. And part of that was that we would have a no fear or an experimental mindset. And I think everybody was in the same boat. And teachers across the country were really quite panicked about learning these new platforms and performing at their very best so as to support our students' needs. So we all agreed together that we would really support each other and that we would have no fear of making mistakes. And I think that really stood to us, especially in the early days where we felt that kind of community approach and the support of making it's okay to make mistakes, and that was a very core part of our shift to online learning. So our initial plan, in week 1 and week 2, and a lot of our our plans changed very much. So the initial planning phases actually went on for about 3 weeks. Even though the shift was very quick, we've trialed a lot of things. So we systematically trialed a number of programs that we were already delivering in our schools for students of determination. So programs like Nessie or Toe by Toe, primary movements, the listening program. Lots of these were actually really conducive to the online setting. And we found that the shift was quite seamless from face to face delivery to online delivery. And that made it actually really quite effective. We then began engaging stakeholders from a very early point in time, talking to parents, talking to our students, talking to the teachers in class, and getting their feedback, finding out what was working and what could be better. And then, most importantly, constant appraisal of students' progress. Because as much as we might think the programs came really well with online delivery, if they weren't impacting our students' progress, then it would have been for very little purpose. So we tracked students' progress meticulously. Now, we were very mindful of keeping the workload quite low. I think teachers across the globe really on the shift to online learning, they discovered that the workload and the intensity of the work production was hugely increased. We had teachers working 8-9 hour days in order to be flexible to accommodate parents. And it seemed to almost intensify everything. So we were mindful of keeping it as simple as possible, where possible. And very early on, we devised an Excel sheet tracking system where every delivery of support, whether that was a push-in, a one-to-one session, or an additional modification for in-class delivery, that we would track it, simply looking at the type of session, the IEP target that it was addressing, and then we RAG rated it as to how effective we believe the progress of that student was in that session. So by gathering all of that information, the head of inclusion in each school would then complete a Google form daily, which was sent up to me in head office, and we could analyse what was working well and what was having the biggest impact on students in a really intricate way. So weekly, our inclusion teams were delivering up to 1,800 support sessions for approximately 300 severe to profound high needs kids across the group. And if you look at the PowerPoint here, you can see that I was gathering this information daily, literally the number of sessions that were being delivered and the impact of those sessions. And by looking at that data, we could then say, okay, this program is working really well in this school. What's making it work well there? And can we emulate it across the other schools? We were able to look at where certain programs were having very little impact and perhaps looking around what might have contributed to that, and could we then perhaps withdraw that program from all of the schools. And it was really interesting to have those insights as to the standards, the quality, and the actual amount of delivery that was being offered. So we had a huge focus on review. And again, going back to the systems thinking approach, a review without fear to change. If something wasn't working, we were happy to withdraw it, to change it, to start again. And I think that had to be the case for teachers in every setting in education, discovering that maybe Zoom might be conducive to one area of delivery but not to another, supplementing with Teams, supplementing with Edmodo or some other platforms, and then appraising how to improve your delivery to suit the platforms that you're using. So there was constant review. And in our setting, we found that Zoom was really good for one-to-one sessions or small group sessions, and it was really easy for our students of determination to use and access, whereas Teams was more conducive to the in-class setting because you could do the breakout rooms or do individual assignments. So editing our delivery and shifting and changing was really important, and the community approach in doing that was super effective. Having all of our heads of inclusion talking to each other, this is working for these kind of kids, this is working for these kind of kids. And within about 2 weeks, I realized the power of this collective of knowledge. So I thought, why not open this out to heads of inclusion across the whole of the UAE or even beyond, and see, can we gather even more people's knowledge and come together and support each other? So with the support of two very dear friends of mine, Louise Dawson and Susie Hashay, we developed an online inclusion and wellbeing forum, which was a voluntary open forum, simply gathering minds together to talk about what was working well, the challenges we were facing, and sometimes just to talk to each other and offer emotional support, because dealing with very high needs students in this setting, it was quite a challenge and quite stressful for our inclusion practitioners. And simply having somewhere to go, like a forum like this, where you could air your concerns and just realize that you're not on your own, it was hugely, hugely beneficial for all of us involved. And we gathered a big bank of resources. Everybody shared their ideas. We had lots of really, really interesting presentations. And all of that information we then helped to disseminate across the practitioners all over the country. And we all learned so much from each other. So I think that community of practice approach really worked well in supporting everybody, from classroom assistants through to students to parents, all stakeholders, gathering everybody's experience together and learning from each other. And it was really a really good experience. So from this trial and error period, we moved into maybe 1 month, 1.5 months into online delivery. We started to embed the practice that we were finding was working. And we were extending trial periods for the different programs that we were using, and then really digging deep into the data. Were the students making extended progress? Now that we could say the students were more comfortable on the platforms, they were more comfortable in the form of delivery that they were experiencing, the actual effectiveness of the program wasn't being impeded by other things. So we could really look at the progress they were making. And by tracking the students' progress in such an in-depth way, it could feed back into the classroom delivery, feed back into SLT's appraisal of where the school needs to improve or what's working well. And again, engaging stakeholders throughout and talking to parents. I think inclusion practitioners particularly became quite intimate with their students and their parents, because you would have parents working with you directly day in, day out as you're delivering. And the parents really got, I think, an in-depth insight into the kind of things that inclusion teams do and the way that they support their students. I think very often inclusion support is sometimes delegated to maybe just simply an extra lesson that the kid will get 2 or 3 times a week, whereas it's so much more in depth. It's such a greater body of experience than just that. And I think parents were starting to realize the complexity of the support that was being delivered, and that really helped them to engage and appreciate the hard work of the teams who were delivering the support. So what didn't work so well? Well, we found that as schools rushed to make the switch, curricular modification took a little bit of a back seat, where teachers were so busy shifting their delivery and devising their lessons to be suitable to online platforms. We found the greatest challenge was with detailed and specific differentiation in classes, which, I think it's only natural as our teachers were experiencing this whole new way of teaching, like the detail of it somehow slipped a little while they got the basics and actually using the platforms, delivering on camera. It wasn't just students who were nervous about delivering on camera. So many teachers, so many presenters, even someone like me, I've been presenting for quite a while, I still get nervous. So we could see our teachers really the first couple of weeks were very uncomfortable on camera. And because they're getting to grips with all of the basics of delivery, the differentiation for sure it suffered. And it was only in the last maybe 3 or 4 weeks of online provision that we started to really tackle differentiation again. And in that, curricular adaptation, curricular modification for students with individual needs that began to start coming back again. And I think if we return to school in September, there's a very real possibility that we will be returning to online delivery. I think that's an area that we really need to focus on in terms of really getting down to the mechanics of differentiation tailored toward specific children's needs. And I think a really a detailed IEP which is suited to both online and face-to-face delivery will be a key component in ensuring that that's done properly. Supporting our teachers in understanding how you can modify delivery to suit students' needs through an online platform will be really important. Another thing that didn't work so well was the accommodations available. So students with very high needs, particularly emotional needs, the accommodations that were in place in the school setting, whereby you might have a buddy system, you might have kind of movement breaks or time in a sensory room or specific support sessions. Sometimes they weren't feasible to be done in the online setting, and that was a big loss to a lot of our students. And we saw an impact in student progress for those who had had a lot of accommodation in school. The disruption to schedules and routine was a huge challenge to many of our students of determination, from mild and moderate needs all the way through to high needs. The shift in the initial weeks was extremely challenging in terms of the independence that was required to engage online, where you didn't have your learning support assistant or your individual learning support assistant or a teacher who can engage with you like in a physical and really a present way through the online. Some of our students really their progress stalled quite a bit because of that, and it took quite some time to kind of kickstart that progression again and get them learning. But the biggest challenge that we found across all of our schools was student and teacher well-being and parents' well-being in many cases as well. But I think the very fact that the DLEs were focused so heavily on well-being speaks to the fact that this was a universal problem across the whole country. Schools were seeing a lot of emotional needs expressing very heavily in the online setting, where students were taken away from their social platforms. Their general engagement was interrupted completely, and some students during lockdown were on their own at home with just mum and dad, and their whole social experience for their whole lives had suddenly been chopped, stopped, and put on hold. And we saw really a lot of really negative effects because of that. And to counter that, we began very carefully appraising individual students and ensuring that the DSL, the designated safeguarding lead, was available at all times in the schools. It's very important that your designated safeguarding lead has support themselves. If they're dealing with students who have very high needs and they're socially, emotionally draining, your DSL will feel the effects of that as well. So kind of supporting your DSL, and I would always advise having multiple DSLs in any school, so that they can rotate, they can share the load, and to have regular DSL meetings where cases are discussed and best practices discussed, and kind of tailored approaches to supporting students is devised as a team. We also started a newsletter, particularly focused on well-being, where we were sharing with families the many webinars that were available, sharing with them events that were happening across the community, and sharing good news stories as well from each of the schools. And we found that by sharing the events that were happening, the webinars, the online meetings, the sessions, a lot of our parents really appreciated that, because some of them didn't know where to look for different advice. And we were sharing information about financial planning, family planning, wellness and health and well-being, handling COVID at home, a huge a huge spectrum of different types of webinars that were happening. And everybody was online, everyone was at home, so accessing them was really feasible, and we found it was a great support and a great way to engage with the community and interact as well. And we found that a lot of the time during COVID, we were bombarded with negative stories all the time, whether it was on TV, through these kind of scary webinars as COVID, how do we handle it? And we thought, why not share good stories? Get kids who are really enjoying their time at home, get families who are maybe experiencing something new at home, and sharing those in our newsletters. And it made a huge impact in our communities, and for us as well as practitioners, because we were seeing the joyous part of the shift that had otherwise been quite stressful. So what did work well? Well, we found that across multiple impairments, there were some really positive outcomes. So what worked well for learning disabilities was the additional space that kids had around their learning. So they worked at their own time. They were able to review their learning in their own time and repeat learning. The fact that lessons were video recorded and available to watch again and again had a huge positive impact on students' progress, and even on their engagement. Like, students would tell us that listening to a lesson the first time, they kind of got it. Listening a second and sometimes a third time, it helped embed the learning really well. Also, learning at their own pace was hugely beneficial for our students with learning disabilities. And for physical disabilities, we saw some really positive impacts for physical disabilities. Having the safety and the comfort of being at home without the challenges of having to move to different classrooms, sometimes having to face stairs, using elevators, being in the comfort of their own home really improved the equity of access for our students with physical disabilities. Students with muscular dystrophy, wheelchair-bound students, students with prosthetics. It actually made their engagement with education a lot easier for them. And again, the self-paced nature of online delivery was really helpful for them. And at home, they had a lot of access to their own integrated technology. So we saw kids using lots and lots of different tools that, as educators, we wouldn't have seen in school, but they had these amazing support tech at home that we were able to engage with, and equally tailor learning to incorporate those into their lessons. For visual impairment, we found a huge increase in the equity of access. Adaptive tech being used at home, like Braille technology, really supported their learning. And of course, the lessons are all recorded. All of your content is there. So they can fiddle around with font and size in their own time, and it really improved their engagement. Equally for hearing impaired, using adaptive tech, embedding subtitles onto videos. And there are a number of apps where you can subtitle teachers' videos really easily, and that really helped them to interact. We also found for hearing impaired students that the interaction over typing made it easier for them to engage with their friends and their peers. So just as they would with WhatsApp, they were now engaging in lesson and educational content through through typing, and it was a lot easier for some of them. And for psychiatric disabilities, we found that a lot of kids were a lot more relaxed. They were in their comfort zone at home. They had a reduced anxiety, and the flexibility of being able to access in their own time at their own pace was really beneficial as well. So there were lots and lots of really positive things in and around the shift to online delivery. So the key takeaways that we found were: don't fear failure. We immediately agreed on this across our team, with our bringing the whole team together. And when we had the online inclusion and wellbeing forum, one of the biggest things that all of our practitioners, and we had up to 300 practitioners joining from Singapore to the UK and across the Emirates, and the resounding kind of the ideas were: don't fear failure, that this is actually a perfect time for us as practitioners to experiment and to trial new things, because nobody really knows what's right. And it is just checking out, does this work? Does it not work? And if it doesn't work, that's okay, just start again. And also to recognize success. I think the first few months of the shift to online delivery, everyone was moving at such a pace, such breakneck speed, that we forgot to take pauses and say, wow, look at what we've achieved over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Look at the shift that we've made. We've revolutionized our industry. And to take stock and take a moment and look at all the good things that are happening and celebrate it. So overall, we've been really happy with the shift to online learning, and moving forward into September, we would hope to continue with a blended model so that we can counter some of the things that didn't work well around well-being and social engagement, but still carry on with all of those really positive things that did work well. And I'm really looking forward to September and getting back to work and seeing all of our practitioners and our students, and just getting back into action. And I hope this was useful. Again, if you want to ask some questions, I can answer in the chat section. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.